So much exciting work that we just heard about, inspiring and generating momentum. One of the things I've really loved about being a part of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is hearing about all the cities and all of that momentum we're seeing around the world. And it's interesting to be part of the Secretariat and every once in a while hear about another city that's about to vote on a motion or passing a motion or has passed a motion and we didn't even know. And I think that's the moment when you know an idea has gone from being somebody's idea to being a movement. You know, we now have 49 cities and 1 state. And that state is Hawaii. Recently, Hawaii became the first state in the world and the first Pacific island, we hope for many more, to adopt a resolution calling for a treaty. And we're fortunate to have a remote address, a short video address from Senator Rhoads, who sponsored the resolution. Can we play that video, please?
Thanks for the opportunity to address your global just transition from fossil fuels pre-summit. With a pandemic raging, wars being fought, and worldwide economic challenges, it is easy to forget that the most important issue facing all of us is humanly induced climate change. It is already affecting everyone, from residents of Hawaii, where I live, to Botswana, Honolulu's antipode. We in Hawaii pride ourselves on how forward-looking we have been on this issue. In 2008, we passed a bill requiring 40% renewables for electricity production by 2030. In 2015, we went farther, becoming the first state in the United States to set a 100% renewable target for electricity production. Since 2014, Hawaii's renewable energy production has doubled from 20 to 40% of the total consumed. As I mentioned, 40% was our target for 2030, a goal we hit 8 years ahead of schedule. One of our smaller islands, Kauai, routinely has days where it is powered entirely by renewable energy. Hawaii has the most rooftop solar per capita of any American state. We generate more electricity from rooftop solar than any single power plant. By the end of the year, coal will no longer be used as an energy source in Hawaii. We banned it with legislation passed in 2020. While we have much to be proud of, many challenges remain. Our tourism economy is entirely dependent on jet travel, a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. With minor exceptions, all travel between islands is by plane as well. The vast majority of our food is imported from thousands of kilometers away, this despite many hectares of agricultural land lying fallow in the islands. To keep Hawaii on the right path and to do our small part to move the world away from fossil fuels, earlier this year I introduced Senate Concurrent Resolution 108 at the request of University of Hawaii Professor Joshua Cooper. SCR 108 affirms Hawaii's commitment to the Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and it calls for American support at all levels of government for a fossil fuels non-proliferation treaty. From small jurisdictions like Hawaii to the capitals of the world's largest polluters, Beijing, Washington, and New Delhi, we all have our part to play in stopping the use of fossil fuel. Relying on someone else to address climate change will result in global temperature increases that will end human life as we know it. The time for action is now.
Fantastic. Just as Senator Rhoads is working hard for positive change at the state level, Jytte Guteland is a member of the European Parliament from Sweden who's pressing for action there and was so disappointed that she could not be with us here today, but sent a short message from Brussels. We'll see if they can find it, and we can wait or show it later. Okay, thank you. We'll show it later. So we have 2 final speakers to come and close the conference for us today. Darn you, Harjeet, for talking about cake and pie, because now I'm only thinking about the reception. Stop it. So 2 more speakers. We need persistence and resilience in this movement, right? I'm very excited to welcome Alex Rafalowicz. Alex is the director of the Treaty Initiative. He's a lawyer with experience as a policy analyst, a campaign organizer, and strategist for climate justice. Previously, Alex was the global director of programs at 350.org and served as a strategic advisor at Code Nation and was also the executive director at the Climate Action Network of Australia. I feel so very fortunate to be working with Alex on the treaty. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today in these conversations. And these conversations have been incredibly important and incredibly powerful. I want to thank the Nordic Council and the Stanley Centre, who maybe have not endorsed the idea of a fossil fuel treaty yet, but endorsed the need for the conversation. Because we have seen over the last decade a change in the understanding of the crisis that we see in front of us. We called this meeting, this gathering, the conversation for a global just transition from fossil fuels. I think it's important that we acknowledge that currently we are not transitioning from fossil fuels. Currently, we are expanding fossil fuels, and at the same time, fossil fuels, which have been around for over 200 years as the center of our energy system, have comprehensively failed to deliver energy that lead to lives of dignity for people across the world. Over 1 billion people live in a form of energy poverty, and 1 billion more just below that critical line. There are, however, 600 million people in this world who live in a country where the income from selling fossil fuels abroad is the largest part of their national budget. So we're facing an intersecting challenge when we talk about our shift away from fossil fuels. We want to deliver lives of dignity for everybody, and that is our overriding priority as a movement. And we need to grapple with the reality of the vested interests that exist around the fossil fuel industry today. We've heard, I think, across all of the panels today, that the risks of the fossil fuel industry are not only risks to our climate goals. We've heard today about the way that the fossil fuel industry risks our relationship with nature. From Nemonte Nakimo, from the SIBO Alliance and Amazon Frontlines, about communities in the Amazon facing the continuing logic of the colonizers trying to displace indigenous peoples from their land in order to profit from the extraction. We heard from Ina Maria, a Namibian artist and climate activist, about the similar fight of a Canadian company wanting to exploit oil and gas in the Okavango region. And we thank Ina Maria for the art that has also decorated the space for these conversations today. The risk of climate extraction is not only to the local community and the local ecosystem, it's then to the overall structure of our political economy, and I think importantly raised in the session this morning, of our culture. So we have seen across the world states organize themselves around the extraction of fossil fuels. But that extraction has not led to greater dignity, greater wealth, or greater prosperity. That instead has led to dispossession, the centralization of power and control, and often the corruption of political systems. So the challenges that we face are many. We have seen that there is, however, much hope to be had. Some of that hope has come from great ideas. Some of that hope has come from joy, from love. Some of that hope has come from being together. I started my journey as a climate activist, helping to found the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. So I also once was a young person on these panels. And then today I had to record a video as a Parents for Future. So I feel like I've really made a just transition myself. as an activist. But that's because this movement for global cooperation on fossil fuels, and this movement, many of us in this room that are a part of calling for a global treaty on fossil fuels, is one part of a broader climate movement. It's one part of a broader movement for climate justice, which is itself one part of a broader movement for justice, for hope, for love, and for peace. And so there are no silver bullets to the challenges that we face. There is no one solution, but by cooperating, demonstrating solidarity, and working together, we can find some of the solutions and begin to build those solutions. We're not going to pretend that in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, there won't still be panelists of young activists saying that what is happening is not good enough and it is not fair. But they may be doing that directly towards a global body that exists to support humanity to come together to phase out the fossil fuel industry. Because we have heard over and over again that industry is not going to end itself. Market signals on the sides are not going to end it itself. It is only with our collective power that we will be able to send the signal of the end of the fossil fuel industry. So there are many causes for hope, I think, that we've heard from today. We heard about the proposal for an ecocide law. We've heard about the idea of cities and local governments taking up this demand. We've heard about parliamentarians coming together to develop more laws, legislations, and policies in their settings. And of course, there is the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative itself. And beyond that, I think we've heard different ways that people in different countries across this world are struggling to change the conditions where they are. That struggle is often extremely dangerous. It's often criminalized. They're often subject to repressive forces from the state, and yet they persist. And I think that we all salute them in that resilience and resistance. All of that political action begins with a conversation. Begins with a conversation about the world that we want to see and the world that we want to build together. So I want to thank you all for having joined us today in this conversation. It is incredibly important, and I'm sure that you will carry that conversation with you into Stockholm+50 in the coming days. Because in the current iteration of the proposals for Stockholm+50, I actually have some good news. It's been going around that fossil fuels were not mentioned in the Stockholm+50 recommendation text. And that was true until yesterday. A text came out in April that did not mention fossil fuels. And many of people in this room and beyond clearly communicated to their governments, to the United Nations, that that was unacceptable. That in the year of 2020, that 50 years out of Stockholm+50, we needed to recognize, as Vanessa said in her opening, that fossil fuels are a unique driver of the triple crisis, of the climate crisis, of the biodiversity crisis, and of the pollution crisis. And today, the draft document does recognize that explicitly. And in fact, it calls for enhanced multilateral processes to address fossil fuel production and to support a just transition in developing countries. If that type of language stays in the recommendations, that will be a clear signal that we are collectively embarking on a new pathway that can give us hope to end the fossil fuel industry in our lifetimes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And now I want to introduce you to Mary Moeono-Kolio, is a young Samoan professional based in Wellington, New Zealand. She's currently the 350 Pacific Climate Warriors Wellington Coordinator, Pacific Coordinating Ambassador for One Young World, and Commonwealth Youth Forum 2020 Task Force member. Some closing remarks from Mary. The floor is yours.
last speaker. Let's go. Talofa lava. My name is Mary Gafaomalietoa Sapati Moeono-Kolio. I'm from the villages of Whalefa, Tiavea, Le'awa'a, and Malie in the island of Upolu in Samoa. Like many Indigenous and First Nations people, I come from a people who have lived in harmony with creation for some 3,000 years. Throughout that time, our ancestors used this relationship to navigate the length and breadth of the Pacific Ocean, to settle new lands, build entire cultures, histories, economies, and philosophies centered on understanding and nurturing the world around us. From nature, we draw our understanding of ourselves and our place in the cosmos, and understand that it is incumbent upon us to be guardians of these lands, rivers, mountains, seas, and all that surrounds us. From birth, our first significant act is to place our umbilical cord and placenta back into the earth, signifying our connection to our ancestral lands and symbolizing that it is from the earth we came to be and where we will return. In Samoa, the very word for placenta and the earth are one and the same, whanua. I'm a long way from home, and I'm a long way from where my whanua is buried to be with you today. The reason is simple. Unless we come together to bring an end to the fossil fuel era, my whanua will join those of many of my ancestors beneath the waves. But rather than give in to the desperation one can only feel when facing their home possibly disappearing, we have resolved to be here today to join with our elders, Ambassador Tevi, Ambassador Lalonio, in declaring that the Pacific will not go quietly, that we are not drowning, we are fighting. So before you leave here today to return to your homes, I want to impart on you that spirit, because we cannot go home from here without a greater resolve to bring about climate justice. In coming here this week, we've heard many voices of frontline and Indigenous communities, my brothers and sisters around the world, calling for climate justice that centers the needs of people, that centers the needs of the collective, that prioritizes people over profit, that we must commit to a rapid and far-reaching actions to transform our societies to avoid worsening climate disasters and impacts that we are seeing worldwide. We heard loud and clear that there is no future for the fossil fuel industry. It's a danger being the 24th speaker on the last panel of the day. So what else is there to say that hasn't already been said? So rather than repeat what we've heard today from the fantastic lineup of panelists and speakers, I want to take the time to affirm their words and encourage you as you leave today. For many of you, this has been your life's work. For others, it's work that we have been thrust into. Some of you have been engaged in this space for many years, and most of us have seen firsthand the impacts that climate change or the climate crisis has had on our people. But for all of us, it is an inescapable reality. Tired as we may be, we do not have the luxury of fatigue, not when there is so much at risk. We have flown 36 plus hours to be here with you on the other side of the world, and so I want to say to you that the work that is being done here today and in the days to come is crucial to the survival of our communities. And if in a human moment you find yourself faltering or find yourself giving in to the cynicism that often plagues the spaces that we're in, think of us. Think of the leaders and the elders in this room who have come from the other side of the world. Although we have contributed almost nothing to the causes of climate change, we are here, we are fighting, and we refuse to be told that this is the way it's going to be. There is an expression where I come from, and I say it often, "E lai titi ai maini." We may be small, but we sting. We may have limited means and a much smaller GDP, but if our history is to have taught us anything, it's that we know how to sustain not only our environment, but the will to keep it. How much more means and access and resources do you all have in your corners of the world, with your much larger populations and greater means to influence environmental outcomes? Many of you were part of Paris, led by the Pacific. The world came together to agree on a target of 1.5. The late Tony de Broom from Marshall Islands is credited as being one of the principal architects of that agreement. E lai titi ai maini. It's perhaps no coincidence as well that today, on the 1st of June, is the 60th anniversary of Samoa's independence. 60 years ago today, my island home, a small Pacific nation, defeated an empire and regained its freedom. E lai titi ai maini. We in the Pacific have been fighting for our survival for a long time, against conquest, colonialism, capitalism, even coronavirus. Except now, we can't fight this alone. Climate change is humanity's great struggle, and we must leave here today with a renewed focus to bring down the causes of this catastrophe. We must end the age of fossil fuels, and we do that by ensuring that the treaty is endorsed by our cities and governments when we return home. If we are to have a fighting chance at meeting the commitments of the Paris Agreement, limiting emissions below the upper threshold of 1.5 degrees is next to impossible when the proliferation of fossil fuels continues at the record levels and without a clear pathway for a just transition. In this respect, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty must be the way forward and will complement the goals of Paris to limit emissions by cutting off supply and accelerating a just transition. We have heard today that the continued proliferation of fossil fuels is one of the greatest acts of violence and destruction that my generation is witnessing play out in real time. So it's not only within our power, but our moral duty to stand against it. In saying that, the same systems that got us here, capitalism, colonialism, will not offer us the solutions. We must be decolonial in our thinking. We must be collective in our thinking. Listen to young people, take them seriously. Listen to Indigenous people and let us lead. I mentioned earlier on today that it's our independence in Samoa. Before we won our freedom, when the colonizers refused to leave and when our ancestors suffered every unimaginable indignation, the fledgling independence movement held on to the words of an old Samoan proverb. Waleai se ngau matau, awa na'o le ngau alofa, which means we are not driven out of fear, but moved by love. These words would come to aid our forefathers during their darkest moments of our resilience when all seemed lost. What of our resistance today? What will be said of our efforts against the very thing that continues to cause suffering all around the world? My friends, family, all is not lost if you choose to return home and be moved by love. These are the words that I would like to leave you with today. As difficult as the task can get, in getting countries and cities to sign on to a treaty is no easy task. We are not driven out of fear, but we are moved by love. for our homes, for our families, for our communities, for our planet, and for the generations to come. Let these be the words that pick you up when things inevitably get difficult. Let the examples of our small but stinging Pacific Island activists and leaders inspire you, and may love compel you. Whaftai lava, thank you.
That was, I think, yeah, we have that. I'm just going to play that final video so I can give myself a minute. The final video from Brussels, please.
Thank you for inviting me to speak at the Stockholm+50 conference. It is really an honor as a Swede and as a Stockholmer, and I truly regret that I could not be with you today, but it's due to the ongoing negotiation on the EU ETS in the European Parliament, and it's going on at this moment. I truly believe that a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty has the potential to become a true game changer in the fight against the climate crisis. The idea is simple and easy to understand, yet points to a true inconsistency in the global fight against the climate crisis. A study published in Nature indicates that we need to leave 90% of the coal and 60% of the oil and gas reserves in the ground to even have a 50-50 chance of reaching the 1.5 degree target. Yet we see new coal plants being constructed, new LNG terminals being planned for, and continued investments in further exploration of more resources. All of these new assets will practically become stranded if we comply with the Paris Agreement, and that is a truly dangerous situation. It will even worsen an already difficult lobbying downward pressure on climate ambition. Instead, we need to invest every public and private investments into the renewables, into the solution that also provide energy independence from invading countries and questionable regimes. This is never a question about if the era of fossil fuels will be over. It is a matter of when. If we start now, we can control the change, make it fair in the transition. Otherwise, it will be a shock. Just when the Russia war, we will face demands to shut down production from one day to another, which is not optimal for anyone. So this simple idea has the potential to ensure a just and fair transition, help our energy independence through disarmament, and secure the climate ambition we need to stay in line with the Paris Agreement. It is our common responsibility today to take this idea, this change of perspective, back to our respective countries and organizations and turn it into reality. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Jytte Guteland, Member of Parliament from Sweden, who's currently in Brussels, sending us that message. So, friends, today we have heard from such an amazing group of speakers, from Indigenous leaders, from activists, from parliamentarians, from young people, from academics, from all over the world. And one thing is very clear. Fossil fuels are not only a climate problem, but they are a biodiversity, an economic, a human health problem, a problem of conflict and an equality problem. Today, expansion of fossil fuels are a weapon of mass destruction. They threaten our lives, our livelihoods, world over. So we stand here on the eve of Stockholm+50, where we're asked to look back over the past 50 years and reflect on how far we've come. But I don't want to look back. With you all here today, let's look forward. What I felt from our speakers today and from all of you here was a call to action. That now is our moment. A new political window that maybe began at COP26 with the first ever conversation about fossil fuels. The first time that even a fossil fuel was mentioned in the text of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. All of your work at home, around the world, and here has led to this moment. And social change is not linear. When we look at history, at huge moments in history, it happens because of tipping point moments. I offer that this is one of those tipping point moments for us being willing as a global community to talk about fossil fuels, to acknowledge the difficulty, to have the courage to talk about what needs to happen and act. So for those of you going to Stockholm+50 tomorrow, I urge you to push your governments to commit to call for a global treaty on fossil fuels as one of the outcomes of Stockholm+50, and to, at the very least, maintain the existing language that we heard about that is in the current text on the need for international cooperation and to stop the expansion of fossil fuels and hopefully to strengthen it. And beyond Stockholm, I urge you to call on every level of government at every decision to make the right decision that stops the expansion of the fossil fuel industry, the right decision to plan for a fair phase-out. You can take that call to your cities, your networks, your faith institutions, to scientists and academics and community leaders. Ask them to join you in endorsing the fossil fuel treaty. And build. Together we can build this new drumbeat of momentum. Thank you so much for being a part of this very important day. Thank you to all of the speakers, and especially those who joined us from the Global South and our Indigenous and youth leaders. And I also just want to take a moment to express deep appreciation and thanks to our team, the Fossil Fuel Treaty team, who pulled off this amazing event, especially to Liz, to Nathan, to Claudia, to Michael, who couldn't be with us here today because he's just had a baby. Congratulations. And to all of the team who put this event together. We are one step closer to realizing a fossil-free future, and that is because of all of you showing up today and engaging deeply, honestly, courageously in these conversations about the threats we're facing and also the path forward to address them. For more information to endorse the call of the Fossil Fuel Treaty, join us at www.fossilfueltreaty.org. A quick reminder for those who are here in person, there's a reception just outside of this room. Tonight from 6 to 8, there is a demonstration at Sergelstorg, the city center. And then after that, a social gathering at the Capitol Rooftop Bar in the Scandic Continental Hotel at 8 p.m. So we can do some more networking, maybe relax a little together and see what creative ideas come out of that gathering. So, and dance, right. Well, if we can't dance, I don't want to be a part of this revolution. Thank you again for coming, for all of your work here in Stockholm this week, for your work at home. This moment in history requires persistence. It requires collaboration, imagination, creativity, and more than anything we know from the stories we've heard today, it requires courage. But the great thing about courage is contagious. Thank you for joining us today.